So my last talk was to do with how and what to do when plans fail in our lives. Few of you were present. And I've had some interesting feedback from that session. And that introspection, that reflection carried on with me. And one of the lines with which I ended that talk was that we make plans to be successful, and the divine disrupts those plans to make us conscious. It's been several days, but this line brought several reflections that when we are setting up our goals, when we are setting up our plans, we set up targets. These targets are some things that are visible to us, and they point in a direction in which we want to take our lives towards. But at the same time, what would happen if the divine is pointing somewhere else? What would that mean for us? And that left me thinking, how do we understand what the divine is actually aiming at? So let's sit with that reflection for the few moments that we have together. Because whatever it is that the divine is aiming for, in the few years that I have spent on this earth, I find it very difficult to measure. And it lives beyond anything that I have thought about or any approach that I have thought about. And then one morning, sitting here at the ashram, in the early hours, the question kind of simplified for me. And I thought there was some clarity, and hence this talk about why the best things in life cannot be measured. So that's a little bit of a background about the topic. So about me, I work as an economist for a living, and it's contradictory that for earning my living, I have to measure things. Things like national income, poverty rates, return on highways that the government delayed 10 years, the impact of price on onions on markets and farmers' livelihood, a lot of measurements that I have done. And by training, I have built this assumption that if something is real, then it has to be countable, it has to be measurable. And in my world, if it doesn't show up in numbers, then it almost doesn't exist. So for me to encounter a question like this was, to understate, slightly embarrassing. But the question would not go away. So I realized I was stuck, completely stuck. And I almost felt like that contestant in Kaun Banega Crorepati who's sitting in front of Amitabh Bachchan under that limelight, and Mr. Bachchan is looking at you with his particular expression that shows kind of little bit of amusement, little bit of patience, building up the excitement, and I as a contestant have no idea where I'm going with this. The question is on the screen, loud and clear. Some options are there, but I'm stuck. So I thought I'll take that cue and do what the contestants do. So they look at lifelines, and one of those lifelines is phoning a friend. So I thought I'll take that lifeline, and I ended up calling 5 friends. And these were 5 brilliant people whom I have known in my career, and they come from 5 different worlds. So those of you who were here in the last talk may find the names familiar. So they are my go-to people for figuring out whenever I need some direction in terms of understanding concepts which I myself find very limited. And I asked each of them the same question: what are the best things in life that cannot be measured? And I was certain that between the 5 of them, at least one would help me find out the answer. So let me introduce those 5 to you. So the first is David, fellow economist, brilliant person. And if you ask him what he's had for breakfast, he'll be able to define how many calories, how much fat content, how much carbohydrates. He has an app on his phone which measures calorie intake. He has trends over the past 3 years. And he also has an app which monitors his sleep intake. Wonderful with data, with graphs. Absolutely brilliant economist. So he measures everything and he trusts what he can measure. So I asked him, because he's like my professional mirror. He's the person I used to be before I shifted to the ashram. And that's the person that I become on Monday mornings when I kind of go back to my work life. So I asked David, what are the best things in life that cannot be measured? So he's a serious person. He doesn't dismiss these questions easily. So he thought for a moment and then he said, actually, you can measure most of them. And then he started giving me some interesting examples. He says there is something called as the QALY, Q-A-L-Y, Quality Adjusted Life Year. And that's a subjective index for measuring well-being. And then there is happiness economics. And Bhutan has a gross national happiness index. And he was coming up with examples. And I had to pause him right there. And I said, David, I asked you what cannot be measured. So he looked at me as if I had said something slightly dangerous. And he moved on the conversation in a different direction. So that lifeline didn't work for me. So I went to my second friend on my favorites calling list, Japanese Masayuki-san. Meticulous, immaculate, and if you watch his desk, it only has the things that he needs in that hour. Perfect. And he spent 30 years advising corporations globally on performance and excellence. So I thought at least he would have encountered some areas where there is difficulty in measurement. Though he believes, and he believes deeply, that if something matters, it can be tracked. And if it can be tracked, it can be improved. But given his diverse experience, I asked him the same question. Masayuki-san, what are the things that in your experience, in your life, that cannot be measured? And he didn't take time. Without hesitation, he said, organizational culture, employee engagement, brand trust, you cannot measure them. And then he said, but there are proxy indicators. And then he talked about his project on building a dashboard that can measure these. So I had to thank him, but I did not take any notes in that conversation. So that's 2 lifelines gone. I moved on, and my third friend, his name is Selvam. He's more like a spiritual seeker. And recently he went through some things. I mean, I cannot share what, but he came out on the other side slightly different compared to what he was before his spiritual journey. So he meditates, he reads spiritual books. I have been suggesting to him to read Savitri. And he uses consciousness and awareness in every conversation. So, and sometimes correctly. So I asked Selvam, in your view, what are the things in life that cannot be measured? So he took a long breath, thought, and said, It's like, when you're in a moment and you're feeling like, okay, this is it, and you try to hold on to it, but then it's gone. And then you read something, somewhere it resonates, but you don't fully understand why. And someone says you should surrender, and you think, yes, surrender, and that's it. But then you're not sure what you are surrendering to and what you are surrendering from. And he kind of trailed off at that. And to me, he sounded like what I was 3 years back when I had started looking at similar concepts and trying to relate them to my thinking. And then he said it's something to do with presence or maybe acceptance, but he wasn't entirely sure. And then he felt slightly frustrated because he thought he knew, but he couldn't articulate. So I had to move on from that conversation. And then I called up Akshay. He was a brilliant man, investment banker, IM, MBA, making good money in Hong Kong, and one day decided to give up the job, started painting, and most people thought he'd lost it. But he does good making art, mostly unplanned, and whatever comes to him in that moment. And the only person who's upset with him is his accountant because he lost big business. And I asked Akshay, what are the best things in life, or what are the things in life you think cannot be measured? And he didn't pause. He said, the moment the painting becomes alive, that moment is something that he's not been able to measure. So I thought the conversation was getting more interesting. And he said, it's like when something shifts and it's no longer that he's making the painting, but it's making itself, and he's just an observer looking at that painting being completed. And then the word that he used for this is flow, that he was flowing. And the painting was flowing. The moment had paused and everything was happening. And he said, he can't plan for it, he can't force it. All he can do is get out of the way. So I think he had arrived somewhere on the map where some of us want to reach, where we get out of the way and let things flow. But I still thought I needed to probe one more. And I called Jonna. She runs a business at a large insurance company. Sharp, funny, completely unsentimental. And being in the business she's heard every version of human anxiety and converted it into a premium for her company. So I asked Jonna, as per you, what are the things in life that cannot be measured? She looked at me, mildly suspicious, and said, Ashish, is that a serious question? I said, yes, of course. No tricks. Okay. She took 2 seconds and said, love. Obviously, you can't measure love. And when it's gone, it's very difficult to claim it back. So I was impressed. And I really appreciated her insight. But then she added, and you know what? That's our biggest unaddressed market gap in the industry. We have to be able to ensure love. I didn't see that coming. And she said, maybe, for the next Valentine's Day, we will launch a product in the market that can ensure heartbreaks. And she said this with a complete straight face. So I didn't know whether I should laugh or whether I should write it down. So I did both. So 5 friends, 1 question, 5 phone calls. David gave me econometrics. Masayuki-san gave me a dashboard. Selvam gave me a semi-formed feeling that he couldn't name. Akshay gave me a moment of flow that only comes when we stop trying. And Jonna gave me love and immediately turned it into a business opportunity. 5 lifelines, all 5 failed. But what struck me was that none of them gave the same answer, and none of them were even close. No overlap, no common language. It's like all of us are looking at the same mountain, but with a different lens, from a different direction. And none of us could see what the others are seeing. So these things revealed something important to me, that these unmeasurable things need not necessarily belong to what we know as the worldview. They are not the property of an economist or a manager or a spiritual seeker or an artist or the pragmatist. And these are pretty much kind of exhaustive in terms of the way we try and understand the world, the lenses that we use to look at the world. And for me, what this meant is that phone a friend is a lifeline that wouldn't work for me in this circumstance. Because the answer is not in any of my friends' mind. But I did not know that yet when I was doing these conversations. So I did what I would do when I'm stuck in my economist assignments. I went looking for evidence. And that evidence pointed me in an unexpected direction. So we'll come back to this. For now, let's hold on and let me show you what I found. So probably a good time for me to do some story sharing. So let me start with one. And I'll confess upfront that this story I'm not sharing as an outsider. It's a story in which I recognize myself quite a bit. And it's about an American businessman who's walking around a beach on his annual vacation. And he sees a fisherman sitting inside a boat, just relaxing and doing nothing. And he's kind of bothered. I mean, it's a good day for a catch, and this guy is just being a bum, just lying around doing nothing. And he went and asked him, "Buddy, why aren't you doing anything?" And the fisherman removed his hat, looked at the guy and said, "Because I've caught enough fish for the day. I don't need to do anything else." The guy is even more irritated. And he said, "If you catch more fish," he says, "then what? Then you can sell it in the market." He says, "Then what? Then you can make more money, you can hire more boats, you can hire more fishermen, you will still have more fish, you can buy boats, you can go public, you can launch in a public offering, you can make lots of money, you can be anywhere that you want to. Then what? Then you can just relax." And what do you think I'm doing right now? I've heard this story several times, and maybe you might have heard several versions of it. So the first time, it was funny, I laughed. The second time, I was a bit uncomfortable. And the third time, I realized I'm the businessman in this story. And that hit me. Because I realized I have always been the businessman. If I were to call David again and share this, he would say you just need to revise your assumptions, get a different data set. But the fisherman, he never had a plan. He never had data. Masayuki-san would say, set up a KPI, a performance indicator for contentment. But the fisherman doesn't know, doesn't care what a key performance index, a KPI is. So whatever the fisherman had was beyond the reach of any instrument that I would have worked on, designed, or implemented in 3 decades of my work. And I couldn't quantify it. So let's do a quick thought exercise. I mean, you don't need to answer aloud, but just try and sit with it. If there's something in your life right now, something that you already have, but you keep postponing the enjoyment of for the want of something else, to be able to come back to it at a later time. Just think of that. See if you can relate to the idea. So as our roles as businessmen, we are always waiting to arrive somewhere first. We are always waiting to do something first. But as the fisherman, he didn't have to wait. So when I looked at Sri Aurobindo's works to understand how to contextualize, how to frame this, so Sri Aurobindo speaks about 2 kinds of developments. Outer development, typically what our worldview demands of us, wealth, status, achievement. And all these one can measure on different scales. And then there is an inner development, the growth of consciousness, the deepening of the soul, for which there are no established indices, at least so far. And he writes in one of his essays on Indian culture, and I quote, "Life cannot be rightly seen in the soul light, cannot be perfectly lived in the soul power of its externalities." And the fisherman, without knowing any philosophy, had arrived somewhere and got some of that inner wealth. He was not going anywhere, but he was fully here. He was fully there. And in Mother's words, once a man has tasted the joys of inner life, nothing else will ever satisfy him. The fisherman had tasted something, he just could not name it. So I went looking for evidence, and I found this interesting study that Harvard conducted in 1938. And it lasted 75 years, and that's what made me curious to read more about it. It was a study conducted consisting of 724 people, blood tests, brain scans, medical records, decades and decades of data. And what they were trying to know is what actually makes a good life. So they were monitoring their vitals and their signs. And after 75 years, it's interesting what they found out. So the conclusion of a study, to simply put across, is that how satisfied you are with your relationships at 50 years of age, the level of satisfaction with your relationships at age 50, It predicted your health at age 80. And it predicted it better than any traditional health indicators, cholesterol levels, heart, this, that. And it was a very interesting correlation. Nothing to do with income, nothing to do with career, nothing to do with net worth, nothing to do with how well you performed on your plans. 75 years of data, and the conclusion is something that is immeasurable. It's not built on measurable data. And Sri Aurobindo says, one who loves God finds the object of his love everywhere. It's nothing to do with what can be counted, but it's all to do with what can be felt. So some of you might be thinking that it's a lovely story. Fisherman, Harvard study, relationships at 50. But I cannot be that fisherman. I have food to buy. Nowadays, gas cylinders to worry about, bills to pay, children's education, house, retirement, medical, a whole lot of lists. And if I want to take my family to that new restaurant that has opened, the one where you can't get a reservation, and when you see the bill, it's more like a cardiac event, then I need to be that businessman, at least for now. Fair enough. I need to earn, agreed. I need to plan, agreed. So I need to measure, okay. So while I think that's fair, but I'm not arguing against it, but slightly distinguishing a few things, because we may be talking about different things in the same way. And to deconstruct this, let's think of an example. And so when I came to Delhi, I found that everybody is loving and talking about this new thing called momos. Okay. I mean, there are dumplings which are more widely available, but everybody wants a momo. So every evening conversation is where the latest joint has opened and who has the spiciest sauce, and all those kind of things. And in one of philosophical talks, this example was used. It stayed with me. And the teacher challenged us to think when we were very hungry and desperate to eat something, what would give us maximum joy? And half the group raised their hands and said, momos. Okay. So assume that you are one of those students. I don't know if you like momos or not. I don't, but you're very hungry and you're given a momo on a plate, and you've not eaten anything since morning. Extreme happiness, extreme joy. And there's nothing in the world at that particular time that would give you more delight than that one dumpling, that one momo. But then you're given the second one because it's a generous gathering. You enjoy the third, the fourth, the fifth, the sixth, the seventh, the eighth. Now it feels slightly full, no matter how much you like momos. And we did a group tour of the vocational trainees here. We wanted to go to Gurdwara Bangla Sahib to have a langar, but their request was, on the way, can we have a plate of momos? Some had 2, some had 4, some had 8. But after 8, so if you're given 10, 12, 15, 20, I mean, I tried. Can get more? Bhaiya, enough. So what happened? You were so happy about momos. Janpat, what some auntie momos. No, bhaiya, first wala was good. Abhi, enough. said, okay, we will get you the first one. Have another first one. Nobody volunteered. So, kind of to come back to the point, the first momo was not happiness, it was just pleasure. And pleasure, by its definition, is limited. We try and find happiness in going to that Michelin restaurant, buying the new 17 Pro Max, whatever iPhone, but it has a ceiling. Think of it when you really desired that new car that had come, and you acquired it. What would happen after that? The pleasure would have been fulfilled, but the quest for happiness continues. It doesn't stop there. It moves on to a different object, but it doesn't end with your acquiring what you are striving for at that moment. In fact, it tends to fade, and that's why you start looking at your next shiny acquisition. So the businessman is not wrong to be able to desire going to that expensive restaurant. But what is wrong is believing that the happiness will get fulfilled after you visit that restaurant. So the fisherman understood this, and probably the businessman did not. Not that pleasure is bad, but pleasure has a ceiling. So we are all in that way looking for that first momo that doesn't disappoint us. But the question is, does that exist? So Sri Aurobindo writes that what we have so far accomplished is pleasure, pain, and indifference. Pleasure, pain, indifference. And what still awaits us is bliss, ananda. Not pleasure, nor happiness as we ordinarily know it, as we ordinarily look for. Pleasure depends upon an object. Remove the object, pleasure is gone. Momo, salary increment, next achievement. Ananda has no such limitation. It is not dependent on any object. It arises from within. It is not something that we can acquire. It is something that we have to uncover, because it's already within us. And Sri Aurobindo also does not treat Ananda as one quality amongst many. He puts it as at a very foundation of existence. Sat, Chit, Anand. Existence, consciousness, bliss. Not three separate things, but one reality seen from three angles: existence, consciousness, bliss. He puts it beautifully. A hidden bliss is at the root of things. The root from which we have never been separated. So it's not at the top of the ladder, it's not at the end of the plan, but it's at the root. It's already there. It's the core. And, if you think about it, that's what makes it interesting. So let's say you want to buy the best mattress in the world. I don't know what's the popular brand these days. Egyptian cotton, temperature controlled, every feature designed perfectly. You can do that. A good businessman will do that. But you can't buy sleep, irrespective of however much resources you have. So the object can be purchased, but the experience cannot be. So Ananda is not an object. It doesn't have a price tag. It cannot be ordered, delivered. It cannot be installed. And in Savitri he writes, since from a veiled God joy the worlds were made, our very senses blindly seek for the bliss. So the momo can satisfy our hunger, but what we are really hungry for is something else. And Sri Aurobindo says that something is already waiting for us at the root of our being. So this led me to another observation which started to change almost how I see everything. So we are trained to think in opposites. So in my case, supply, demand, growth, recession. And if I were to think of difficult times, sorrows, even the time when I have discerned for any amount of hope, there has always been that little something else that would have touched me in the darkest times. A small child laughing, rainfall, a beautiful flower, an old photograph that I discovered, someone's hand on my shoulder, a song that I wasn't looking for, but I absolutely loved listening to it, the smell of something cooking, a moment of unexpected beauty at the times of our greatest griefs, like a kindness that's come out of nowhere for no reason, it's just appeared, like a memory that coexisted with our pain, even for a fraction of a second, which means that even at the moment of our deepest sorrow, our most profound grief, sorrow is not complete. Something else can coexist with it. Now let's reverse the question. Let's forget about sorrow. Let's talk about the deepest happiness that we would have known, real happiness. Something for which there's no clear cause. You wake up, it's a beautiful day. You wake up, you have a call from your, age-old friend whom you've not spoken to. Or just a moment of sitting quietly and you feel something is complete in this moment. Something is so beautiful in this moment. You're not seeking it, it's just arrived. The Gita calls it Sukham Atyantikam, happiness without limit. Not happiness without pain, not happiness without disturbance, but unlimited happiness. So sorrow has a limit, but happiness is limitless, it's endless. It's very difficult to say this is where my happiness ends. And this is the kind of asymmetry that stayed in my mind. How can we say that sorrow is limited, but happiness is endless? And the only conclusion I could reach is because the way we measure these things is something that is inaccurate, insufficient, or maybe we don't have the right tools. So in my work, I've spent years studying scarcity, and economics thrives on scarcity. What runs out, what can be exhausted, what follows laws of diminishing returns. But the moment I try to apply this to the concept of true happiness, none of them fits in. You cannot have too much of ananda. It does not deplete the one who feels it, and it is not diminishing with the quantity that you acquire of it. And ananda does not present itself in units we can count. Sorrow you can trace. Ananda, it's very difficult to trace. It just arrives. And for me, when I remember such a moment, I want to hold on to it. Hold on to it like there's no end, there's no ceiling. I don't want to let go of it. And this is what we are talking about, the real things in life. And Sri Aurobindo already said, hidden bliss is at the root of things. And our very senses blindly seek for it. And he shows us where to find it, not outwardly, not in our minds, but somewhere deep inside. So let's explore that a little bit. So in Synthesis of Yoga, he speaks of a deeper heart within us. And to quote, a deeper heart in us can open with its divine love for all creatures and its infinite passion and yearning for the responses of the infinite. Infinite passion, infinite yearning. And these are not the words that would fit any kind of measuring index. And Mother says, when the divine grants the true inner happiness, nothing in the world has the power to snatch it away. It's not linked to circumstances, it's not linked to losses, it's not even linked to sorrow. Okay, one final story. Short one, but again something that I found profound. Some of us would have heard about Viktor Frankl, psychiatrist, Holocaust survivor, author of the best-selling book, Man's Search for a Meaning. And if you've not read the book, I'd highly recommend. It's moved me deeply. So Frankl was once visited by an elderly doctor. The man who came to visit him was consumed by grief. His wife had died 2 years earlier, and he still could not move past that. And he wanted to get Frankl's advice on how he can deal with that loss. So Frankl did not console him, but he asked him just one simple question. He said, "Doctor, what would have happened if you had died before your wife passed away?" So what would have happened if you had died first and she had to survive you? The old man went still. He said it would have been terrible for her. And she would have suffered enormously because I don't know who would have taken care of her. Then Frankl said quietly, said, "You see, doctor, that suffering has been spared for her. You spared her at the price that you now have to survive and mourn." The doctor said nothing. He just shook Frankl's hand and he left calmly. So what changed? There was no medication, there was no data, there was no intervention. One invisible thing had entered that room. meaning, man's search for meaning. So the entire book of Viktor Frankl is on the premise that suffering ceases to be suffering the moment it finds a meaning. So man's search for a meaning, and he correlates it to what made him survive the Holocaust, the difficult treatment in a Nazi concentration camp. So even sorrow can be completely transformed by something entirely unmeasurable. So if you think about your own reflection, and you can do that at some point of time, if there's a moment, just a fleeting moment, where you've been able to find a meaning to that sorrow, when you understood, even dimly, why it had to be so, karma, past deeds, something else that would have happened, in that moment, did the sorrow change its quality? Did it loosen its grip upon you? It may not have disappeared, but it would have certainly changed. And that change is not something that we can measure. I call that grace. Small intervention. Today, when I was walking to the meditation hall, there's a daily quote that is written, and it's a quote from the mother that says, "All you need is one atom of light, and it can remove the darkness." Just one atom. So in the synthesis of yoga, Sri Aurobindo says something that may land differently after you hear this story. He writes, "This thing most intimate to us, yet at present most obscure, which keeps us, for us, wrapped in its passionate veil, the deep and rapturous secret of the transcendent Godhead." Most intimate, yet most obscure. And that is where Frankl found it. Not in any doctrine, not in any argument, not in anything measurable, but in the heart of a grieving old man. That's the most intimate place. And it had been there all along. It was just obscured by that sorrow, that grieving that he was going through. And it was waiting to be uncovered by that single question Frankl asked him. Sri Aurobindo writes on the mother and her descent into the world. She has consented to descend here into the darkness, that she may lead it to the light, into this world pain and its obstinate sorrow and suffering, that she may end it in the transforming ecstasy of a sublime ananda. So the darkness is not the end. The sorrow is not the end. Frankl called it meaning. We may call it grace. Akshay, my artist friend, calls it flow. All three are pointing towards the same thing, something most intimate, something most obscure. And when it arrives, it changes everything. So let us bring together the few stories that I've shared in the talk today. The fisherman's content, unmeasurable. Harvard's 75 years of study ending at something unmeasurable. The pleasure in a momo, measurable. The ananda beyond it, unmeasurable. Frankel's meaning, the one thing that transformed nothing else could, unmeasurable. So David would say, yes, I'll build another index to measure that. Masayuki-san would say, we'll find a proxy indicator. Selvam, my spiritual friend, would say, it's something to do with presence, maybe acceptance. I don't think he will still be sure. Akshay would say, get out of the way, let it come, let it flow. Jonna would say, you can't measure it, you can't insure it. Maybe it's another unaddressed insurance segment for her. All of them, they are pointing towards something real, but yet none of them are complete in their explanation. Because the question is not just what are these unmeasurable things? The question is deeper. What does this tell us about ourselves, and how does it define how we are reaching out towards them? So, if the best things in life cannot be measured, if contentment cannot be indexed, if happiness has no ceiling, if meaning and freedom and ananda cannot be put in any spreadsheet, what does this tell about us, our being who keeps on reaching out for these things? It tells us that while we consider ourselves, our identity in our physical form, but then there is something that overflows this identity. There's something beyond. Like the businessman worked for 30 years to achieve what the fisherman already had. Howard measured everything for 7 decades, but found what no instrument could have measured. Frankel's doctor interaction found meaning in a single question no instrument could have produced. So what is this reaching and what we are really? And in the words of Sri Aurobindo, he says, man, because he is a mental being, gives the highest importance to the thinking mind, its reason and will, and its way of approaching truth. He is inclined to believe that there is no other way. Inclined to believe no other way, only the thinking mind, only the reason, only measurement. So now maybe all of us can recognize this. I started recognize this. And then Sri Aurobindo says what the thinking mind makes of the heart. The heart, with all its emotions and movements that the mind cannot calculate, is to the eye of the intellect an obscure, uncertain, and often a perilous and misleading power, which needs to be kept in control by reason and the mental will and intelligence. Incalculable, obscure, uncertain, perilous. This is what the mind says about the heart. So the intellect is not wrong, it's doing its job, it's the right instrument for what it was built to do. But it is like using a ruler to measure a sunset. And perhaps now we can see why this measurement ruler keeps breaking. And why measurement requires distancing ourselves from what we are experiencing. Meaning requires immersion. The fisherman was not observing contentment from outside. He was already immersed in it. So an intellect can estimate value, it can help us write good reports, but the heart is what holds the key. So do you remember at the beginning I told you how I felt stuck as part of a Kaun Banega Crorepati where I was a contestant and I phoned 5 friends and all lifelines failed. What I did not know at that point of time is that phone a friend is the wrong lifeline. And the right lifeline does not require a phone call. It does not even require us to connect to anybody else. It requires us turning inwards into our heart caves. And that's where the answer lives, and that's where the answer has always lived. And the stories that we've explored, the fisherman, the momo, the Frankel story, they're all pointing us to look inwards. And that does not mean that all emotion is wisdom. Sri Aurobindo talks about the psychic light, the true heart that becomes the inner oracle. And he also says that most of us live in the lower emotional nature, driven by ego, attachment, need to acquire, need to protect. And we tend to identify this lower movement as love. We tend to identify this lower movement as devotion. We build temples. And I agree that it's not nothing, but it's not that mystic light. It's not that inner connection that we should be looking for. The psychic being, the inner soul, whatever term one uses, the spark of the divine, goes through every layer of our lives, goes towards our truest nature. So the fisherman in our story had touched it. He just did not know how to put it in the right language. The doctor who was grieving found it in that moment. Akshay touches it when he finds his painting flowing. And that is not a flaw in our design, but that's the most important thing about us. That we have this psychic being in us. And I think, for me at least, one place to look for answers as to what we should be looking for is the opening line of Sri Aurobindo's Life Divine. He writes, "The earliest preoccupation of man in his awakened thoughts, and as it seems his inevitable and ultimate preoccupation, for it survives the longest periods of skepticism and returns after every banishment, is also the highest which his thoughts can envisage. So it centers around 4 terms: God, light, freedom, immortality. And which of these 4 can we measure? God, light, freedom, immortality. And Sri Aurobindo says that these are what humanity has always cared about. And this is what no instrument that can measure can touch. And he's not saying this is a problem, but he's saying this is who we are, who we really are. And it's the aspiration, it's the most fundamental fact about human consciousness. So we were built not for what we measure, but we were built for the unmeasurable. And this is something that I have found slowly. I'm still finding it. And in moments that I cannot explain, in moments when I cannot put it in any kind of report, it's a moment of stillness that arrives for no reason. It's something with no name in my professional vocabulary. And though my 5 friends, whom I consider very wise, they gave me something, but it's really within me that I find what I'm looking for. And I've spent my career trying to be a performer. Build knowledge, careful, rigorous, measured. But in life, the performer is not the point, it's the infinite who's the composer. And increasingly, I'm learning towards trusting that instrument more. And every one of us in this room, if you reflect, would have felt it at some point of time. Things that make no economic sense, but yet we feel it, we cannot explain it. And then life resumes, we go back to measuring, it comes back. So the most important lifeline is never on the screen, it's something that's within us. And what Sri Aurobindo tells us, what the mother tells us, what every tradition has pointed towards, is that love, bliss, freedom, light were never anywhere else. They were here. And it begins at the moment we stop measuring them.